All right. Welcome into another edition of Steak, Bourbon, and Sports. This is the show where we eat steak, drink bourbon, and talk about sports. And we have a special, very special show for you tonight.
It's a very special episode.
Some episodes, they're just okay. This one, though, we always try to build it up. Like, it's going to be a great episode, great guest, blah, blah, blah. But no.
This
Most
one
of the
has
time,
the rare opportunity to actually be good.
most of the
This
time,
may be, and I don't want to jinx it, but this may be a good show.
it may be a good show. That
Awesome.
is that's a really heavy bag to hold right there. I don't
Well, I
know if I
haven't
can
listened to
live
the
up.
show yet, so I can't tell you for sure. And frankly, the show hasn't happened yet, so I really can't tell you.
Well,
But I think it could be good.
fingers crossed. Jeremy Mandel. So, for those of you listening to this podcast, that's cool, and we appreciate that. We also broadcast live every single Tuesday night on YouTube at Steak Bourbon and Sports, youtube.com/Steak Bourbon Sports, something like that, something to that effect. And so, if you were watching us right now, you would see that Jeremy is not in his normal humble abode, but instead in what can only be described as a Kentucky hotel room.
I am.
Because that's what it is, right?
But it also very much looks
Yeah.
like it. The bed frame, the picture, the painting behind the bed. Like, if you had not told me where you were, I'd be like, you're in Kentucky. That's amazing. Look at that bed. I knew it. I could just tell.
I'm coming to you live from the historic Brown Hotel in Louisville, Kentucky. This place has been here for some number of years. That's a lot.
Is it really historic?
And yeah, no, I did all my research for this show.
Is it haunted? Because I feel like most historic hotels are also
Well, I've
haunted.
only been here for like a half hour, so
Okay.
I'll have to report back to you on ghosts or no ghosts.
Behind you is Dan Stromberg, who we've had on the show before. So
Right.
Cheers.
why are you guys at a hotel room in Louisville, Kentucky?
Well, tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern, we will be doing a barrel pick at Four Roses. So myself, Dan, and two other friends are going to be meeting at the Cox's Creek location where they do a lot of their bottling. Is it all of their bottling or a lot of their?
I think it's all about.
Yeah, all of their bottling. And we are going through the private selection program that they do there. As we've talked about, Four Roses does as good a job or better job than anybody at that particular deal. So we are in the night before barrel pick preparations, honing these beautiful pallets that we have to make sure that when we get in there tomorrow, we are selecting the very best barrel of whiskey possible.
So as much as it seems like a joke to say that, getting your palates
really
ready
am doing
and
that.
preparing,
Yeah,
what
not a joke.
What kind of a joke? But what
Well, I
goes?
mean, it's like I recognize that it's a ridiculous thing to say. So that part of it's a joke, but I'm also actually doing it. So,
like you're Michael Phelps getting ready for the Beijing Olympics or something. Like,
I compare myself to Michael Phelps in a lot of aspects of my life. That's just another one of them.
The resemblance is uncanny.
Yeah,
I've often said
we're
that
on the
about
same-
Jeremy.
we're on the same workout regimen. We consume the same number of calories every day. Lots of similarities.
You have a lot of gold medals combined with him.
Yeah, together we have more gold medals than any individual athlete. If only we were together an individual, but we're not.
Yeah.
But still, together we have as many gold medals as almost any duo you could name.
So what goes into the pre-barrel picking exercises that you're going through now?
So, being the loser whiskey dork that I am, we tend to travel around with whiskey and keep them in these little 2-ounce bottles so we can send samples to friends and all that sort of stuff. And coincidentally, 2 ounces is also the limit that TSA will allow you to bring on an airplane, a sealed container. So,
Although you can bring almost as many 2-ounce bottles as you want on your carry-on.
Right. And so I have these sort of handy bags here. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, you'll see this. It's a bag suitable for carrying onto an aircraft
It's like a Dop
that
kit.
can hold 10 separate 2-ounce samples of whatever. And my whatever is bourbon. So we've got different kinds of Four Roses, things that I want to kind of guide myself towards, things that I want to guide myself away from, so I can kind of try to spot all that. Four Roses is particularly unique in the single barrel selection because they have 10 proprietary yeast strains or 10 proprietary recipes. So when you buy a bottle of Four Roses in a store that is anything other than their single barrel, it's some combination of their 10 recipes, depending on what it is. Some of them have 6 of the recipes, some of them have all 10, some of them have 4.
But a blend.
Yeah, there's some kind of blend. The single barrel, of course, is just one of those recipes. If you're buying the 100 proof single barrel in the store, it's their OBSK recipe. That, don't ask me what that stands for, but that's the code they use for one of the 10 recipes. OB means it's one of their higher rye content bourbons. Four Roses has, I think, and Dan, correct me, I think Four Roses has one of the higher rye contents of any bourbon that you can get in their OB series. Their OE,
35%.
yeah, it's 35% rye in that recipe. Their OE, I think, is 20% rye. So lots of different flavors, lots of different ways that that those tastes can come forward, and different people are attracted to different recipes. There's some that I may love that other people may really dislike, and vice versa. So the important thing about a barrel selection is I don't care what anybody else thinks. I want to pick what I like the best or what my group likes the best.
Right, but that's two different things.
Yeah, but that's actually the interesting part, because you end up, in the times that I've been on them, the 2 or 3 best whiskeys or barrels seem to present themselves pretty readily. I have not been on a pick where it was, well, first of all, I've never been on a pick where there wasn't a barrel that I didn't really at least like, if not love. And typically the group gravitates towards 2 or 3 of the selections.
And at Four Roses, kind of the big whiteboard up there and let you rank everything however you want. And we're going to have 4 people tasting tomorrow. We'll probably, it may be, hopefully some of the folks that we like at Four Roses are going to be tasting it with us. And rank everything up there. Well, I don't want to jinx it. We'll make this 2 parts. We'll have a pre-pick. Next week will be the post-pick podcast where we'll talk about what we actually did. This week is just dorks preparing. And then next week will be dorks recapping.
Is the not wanting to jinx it Brent Elliott, the master distiller at Four Roses? Is that who you're talking about?
Well, actually, I mean, of course, we certainly wouldn't kick Brent Elliott out of the room if he wanted to come hang out with us. But at Four Roses, the barrel selection manager is a wonderful lady named Mandy Vance, and she's fantastic, and I'm hoping she's willing to go through it all with us. Usually she is.
And Jim Rutledge?
Jim Rutledge no longer works there.
Right. But he does occasionally partake?
I don't think so.
Not actually at the distillery anymore.
Okay.
He's
so who are you trying not to jinx? I'm trying to figure this out.
What, this line of questioning really contradicts.
Who are the big name people that you're trying to be rubbing boots with that you're not sure if you're going to be?
You know what? If it were left to me to answer that question, I would say all I want are 8 great barrels, and it's our palates that choose them. It'd be great if Brent or Dan Gardner, and Gardner won't be there tomorrow.
No.
But it's really, what are the barrels they roll out?
They roll out different number of barrels for different picks. You really don't know what you're walking into until you walk into the room itself. Sometimes you get 5 barrels to choose from, 6 or 8 or 10 or whatever. It all depends. Mandy Vance manages Brent Elliott allocates the barrels that go into the single barrel select program, and then Mandy allocates what goes into each individual pick, what barrels get rolled out, how many, what recipe.
So what goes into the allocation?
And it might be worth noting, Jeremy, that tomorrow is Veterans Day, and that this pick is very specifically for a charity event called Special Ops Excursions, which Lauren is one of the people that raises money for it. And so in the past, they've definitely brought out, and the barrels that have been picked in connection with Special Ops have been killer. Really, really good. And it's in honor of people who have served our country, and appropriately, because ultimately these barrels will raise a lot of money.
And inappropriately, I'm one of the people choosing it.
Really appropriate for that.
Yeah. But so yeah, there's the fact that it's doing this selection on Veterans Day is not an accident. By the time this podcast goes live, we will have made our pick. And I'm really bad at updating the old Instagram account. But if you hop on our Instagram, by the time this goes live, you'll see some pictures, some videos, some different stuff that we've been doing.
So you're making a commitment to documenting this for our...
Yeah, it's kind of a spur of the moment commitment that I'm making.
Nice. Good job. Really good stuff there. Getting good footage.
So it's supposed to be raining tomorrow, so I'm going to be very obnoxiously singing Elvis's Kentucky Rain song all day. So maybe that'll show up on Instagram. You never know.
Right. So what goes into allocation? Like how does a master distiller decide what's going to be a single barrel, and what's going to...
So it's a two-step process. First step is the Brent Elliott step. That's where you literally just go through, and Four Roses does, and I don't know how dorky we should really get here, but
very.
If you want to get very dorky, here we go. Four Roses is known for having single-story warehouses. So you go to Buffalo Trace, you go to any of the Jim Beam products, basically almost any other whiskey distiller, and they're going to have multiple levels of their warehouses.
Right.
Does that, Wild Turkey does that, almost everybody else. And what that does is, heat rises. So the barrels at the top of the building will have different environmental conditions than barrels at the bottom of the building. Four Roses being a single floor distiller, they don't have that. But what they do have is different tiers and ricks. And if you look at the front label of any Four Roses single barrel bottle, it will tell you specifically where on property the barrel was. So different ricks, it goes 1 through 6. So right stacked on top of each other. That will tell you how high or low in the single story it is. Four Roses will produce a run of a certain recipe. So we're talking about OBSK, which is what goes into their standard single barrel. They'll produce a whole bunch of OBSK, and in one warehouse location, there's just a whole bunch of them. So what they will do is taste through the various runs that exist of the various recipes that they have. And depending on production, depending on how things turn out, sometimes you'll see a whole lot of specific recipes for a little while, and then it'll go away for a little while, and it'll come back. For a while, my favorite recipe, which is OESO, was particularly hard to find. It's getting ready to not be all that hard to find anymore because they've been producing more of it. But what Brent Elliott will do is go through these various different runs of the various different recipes, taste through them, decide if any of them are particularly good on their own. Sometimes whiskey's better if you add some water to it. Sometimes whiskey's better on the rocks, whatever. But the best whiskey, I think, is good right out of the barrel, not messed with at all. So that's one of the things he's tasting for, is what are some of these outstanding runs. And when he locates an outstanding run, he will allocate a certain percentage of those to the single barrel program. Once they're in the single barrel program, it's Mandy's job to then decide on a given day for a given group what individual barrels and what individual recipes get rolled out for that group to try. Very rarely do you get to try through all 10 of them for a bunch of reasons. Drinking 10 barrels of whiskey, it's kind of, by the end of it, it's a little tough. Some seasoned whiskey drinkers, such as ourselves, would be able to navigate through that. But theoretically, and usually this is the case, if you're tasting something that's in the single barrel program, then you are tasting kind of the best of what they have to offer. And that's not just the case at Four Roses, that's the case everywhere. But Four Roses being my favorite distillery, it means that we're tasting through some of the best of what they're producing right now. Various different ages, various different recipes. The single barrel program has to be 8 years old for it to get in there.
How long? What was that? At least 8 years old?
Right. It can be older than 8 years old. It cannot be younger than 8 years old for the barrel proof single barrel. Sometimes, actually, usually they're a little younger than that for their standard 100 proof single barrel, but for their uncut, unfiltered barrel strength single barrel program, it's got to be at least 8 years old. And the interesting thing is, a lot of people feel like age should correlate to how good it is. And that's really not the case at all. So, for example, I had a barrel of, and Four Roses is good because they'll literally measure it down to the month. So they'll tell you it's 8 years, 0 months, or 10 years, 4 months, or whatever it is. And a lot of people will think that the age of it correlates to how good it is. So if I've got an 8-year pick and a 10-year pick, well, I want the 10-year pick because that's going to be better. Not necessarily true.
Okay, so go into more detail on that.
So there's all kinds of variables that go into going to produce the ultimate taste when you drink something.
Age is a factor.
Okay, but it's probably worth noting that there's a level of unpredictability with respect to that.
Yeah.
It's
a science.
Well, no, it's not. Some of it's science, some of it's art, some of it's guess, because where specifically in a stand of trees did the oak come from? How long was that oak seasoned? I mean, you had Uber on, and he was great, by the way. But all those things, like the grain of the wood, matters. Where it is in the rick oak, and little things that you don't know, kind of like how big were the variations in the temperature throughout the period of life. So I mean, that could vary. You know, if it's a bunch of stuff. I don't think it'd be an interesting question with Brent whether or not you could say, well, could you predict, right? Could you predict based on a distillation run and what barrel set it went into, how those barrels would come out in 7, 8, 10 years? I mean, there is definitely a lot of science, but on single barrels in particular, I think there is some serendipity around.
Especially if you can't account for some of the factors involved. Right. I mean, like if you keep consistent temperatures or, well,
and one of the reasons why this region of the country, in my opinion, produces the best whiskey is because Kentucky and Indiana and Ohio and kind of that part of the country, you get 4 distinct seasons. So when you get 4 distinct seasons, you're getting a lot of variation in the temperatures. And when hotter and colder, that draws the whiskey into and out of the wood. So you're pulling more or less of the wood out of it. So, okay, let's say we have 4 summers in a row that are particularly hot. That'll have an impact. And when I put the whiskey in the barrel, I don't know what the weather is going to be for the next 10 years.
What about the relative humidity of the warehouse conditions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
and traditionally, what do they keep the warehouse? I mean, they're keeping it at a set temperature? Is it fluctuating?
No, it's not weatherproofed at all.
On purpose.
So if it's cold outside, it's gonna be cold in the warehouse. If it's hot outside, it's gonna be hot in the warehouse.
So no central heating or air.
No, not at all. Well, Old Forester's messing around with experimenting with that sort of thing. Traditionally, no, there's no temperature control at all that happens with that. So, if the warehouse is on a hill, the sixth tier is higher than the sixth tier of a warehouse where it's in a little valley. So those things kind of seem like they'd be silly, but there's actual temperature variations that sort of difference can make, and that'll have an impact on the whiskey. Not to mention at all what Dan was bringing up, which is different barrels will do different things depending on the grain of the wood, depending on how you've seasoned the barrel. Seasoning the barrel meaning, have you let it out in the sun to just sit? There are some distilleries like Dan and I got to do a pick at Willett a couple years ago, and Drew Colesveen at Willett was telling us that he's got some barrels that have been just sitting out in the elements for I think 2 years.
The distillers at Indiana that we talked to also, he said something about what they did to their wood that was really interesting.
At Starlight, the Hubers.
Yeah.
That's what. Yeah, Dan was referencing that a second ago.
That's right.
Do all kinds of interesting things with barrels.
Yeah.
It was pretty interesting that Huber said that 70% of the aroma profiles in whiskey are associated with the wood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is crazy. It's so much higher than I thought it would be.
There. Yeah, there's all different factors there, which make it really, I think, interesting when you're sitting there trying to pick favorites and notice the differences between 6, 8, 10 barrels. You never really know what you're going to get. So
okay, back to the age thing though for a second. Okay. Do you think that there are any factors, any of these conditions, any of these factors that we're talking about that are more conducive to longevity? Like, do you think like if you have this type of a barrel, then maybe then it's better to be in there for longer, or vice versa? Like, do you think that there are other factors that would implicate whether or not age matters?
I'm sure that there are. Really, my rule of thumb, which, if you get a real distiller on here, I'm just some schlub. But if you get a real distiller on here, they may tell you I'm crazy. But in a general sense, the longer it's in the barrel, the more oak you're going to get. Now, that's not by any means a 100% kind of rule or anything.
But that does intuitively make sense.
Yeah. So the more years that you get the whiskey moving in and out, the more oak you're going to have. Now, whiskey distilleries have to kind of that's a hard line to tiptoe around, because every year that you let that whiskey age, you're losing some percentage of it to evaporation. So a lot of times, you fill that whiskey barrel up all the way on day one. If you fill up, say you let that age for 20 years, you may be looking at 20-25% of that barrel being full by the end of it. And in some cases, that's what it is if you're lucky. So they've got to kind of toe the line between, we want to age it long enough so that it tastes exactly how it should taste. And every distiller will give you a different answer in terms of how long is the ideal time. But you don't want to age it so long that there's not much whiskey in there at the end, and thus not much money to be made by selling the stuff.
Well, I would add that extensive aging can actually, the tannins in the wood, it can become too woody, right? There are some old whiskeys where you're like, well, that was kind of like sucking on a matchstick.
Right.
And so the brilliant old whiskeys that I've had tend to be lower proof and kind of have struck this balance between the wood components and all the other things that are going on. And yeah, age does not, I don't think in Jeremy's mind either, but in my mind, it does not equate to being increased age improves the quality of the whiskey you're drinking.
Well, and I'll give you an example just from my own opinion. Heaven Hill, I think last year, 2 years ago, I think, did a 27-year age release, and at barrel proof, it was something like 92 proof or in that neighborhood. And I thought it tasted kind of like if I went outside to my backyard and took a big bite out of a tree trunk. So
I guess I should sell them.
and people are paying in upwards of $1,000 for that bottle.
Wow. 27 years.
Yeah. And it's
Just seemed like a long time to be in wood.
Yeah, and some people really like that. Some
Let me ask you
people
something
really
though.
are into
What
that.
about
I'm not.
what about aging in a bottle?
It doesn't.
No, no, but so I mean, people will keep certain types of alcohols, bourbon in a bottle. I mean, for a long period of time, which ages even more. And I mean, you talk about Dusties. Like, so what does that do to the flavor profile at all, if anything? Or is it just like, look at how rare this is?
It's a tremendous debate, but in theory, the whiskey stops aging when you take it out of the barrel. The aging comes from the interaction of the liquid with the wood and the elements. As soon as you remove that,
specifically the oxygen,
right?
Right.
As soon as you remove that, those factors are no longer at play. Now, as we talked about on the show we did about Dusties with Nick Smith, something's different about the whiskey from 40 years ago, and there's all sorts of theories about what that is. And you may think it's better, you may think it's worse, and for me, it depends entirely on who made it. But something changed, or who knows what.
And I'm sure some of those same factors are still at play. I mean, obviously, it's not in wood; it's in glass, but it's going to be in conditions. You know, it could be on a shelf, and
I could make an argument that says that 50 to 100 years ago, the distillation techniques, the transfer methodology, there's any number of different factors that could have affected the whiskey during that process, right? Where they took the heart out, the tails and the heads coming out differently. A lot of that whiskey is actually younger, right? And so the environmental conditions seem like they could have been substantially different than they are today, because even though they're not temperature controlled warehouses, you can bet that those guys are pretty careful about temperatures during the mash, during the distillation, where precisely, they take their cut that goes into single barrels, and they might actually say, okay, well, here's the real heart. And then there's, the barrels or the whiskey that comes out, distillate that comes out above and below it goes into another section. I mean, you could start cutting it pretty finely. So who knows? But that old whiskey is definitely different. And maybe some of it really is from being in a glass bottle for 100 years.
And the other part of this too, I wonder is, like, if somebody has a bottle, an older bottle, and let's say like somebody wants to buy it today for $100, just for sake of argument, say that, okay? Then that bottle will be worth more in 5 years or 10 years.
Well, if you want to talk about worth more in terms of dollars, then there's even more factors at play there.
Right. I guess what I mean by that, like, let's say you have the right kind of a bottle. Let's say you have old granddad that is, pre Jim Beam.
Right.
So it's, it's a, whatever it is, if it ages 10 more years in a bottle, does that make it more valuable?
Well, it's not. So we get aging in the bottle out of your vocabulary.
It just becomes rarer.
Yeah. It's really more of a supply and demand issue at that, where the whiskey's not theoretically changing too terribly much in the bottle if you're in the proper conditions. Once it's in the bottle, there are things that can ruin it. There aren't a lot of things that can make it better, though. For example, light is the enemy of your whiskey. That's why liquor cabinets are dark. If you keep whiskey in your window, then you're going to notice that the color of the whiskey is going to be changing, and you're going to see some potential evaporation if you do that after you open it. Let some oxygen in. So here's your PSA for this week. Keep your whiskey in a closet or a cabinet or something. But in terms of value, which is what your question was, value really just depends on who wants it at the time. And the longer away you get from something, the more time people have been popping those things open. And 1 year after something's released, there's this many number of unopened bottles. 10 years after, there's less. 20 years after, there's less than that.
And so on and so forth. Yeah.
I can find you pretty easily something from the 80s or 90s. A little tougher for me to find you something like from Prohibition.
Yeah.
because people have been popping those things open and drinking them.
So
What are you doing, by the way?
how'd you get invited to this very exclusive barrel pick?
Dumb
on
luck.
Veterans Day?
Dumb luck. You've heard this show. You know I don't deserve it, but here I am.
You don't. You're not deserving of this.
No.
Okay, well, I'll let Jeremy kind of float by on that, but I think consistent contribution to the community and having a good relationship with Lauren. And
Sure.
I think that's probably pretty much it.
Yeah. So here I am, and here Dan is.
So where?
It is dumb.
So we all agree it's dumb luck for both of you.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
So where can people get their hands on these bottles eventually, if they can?
That's a good question, and let's save that for part 2.
Okay. Will they have a sweet label, like some sort of veteran label?
It'll certainly have a sweet label. I'm not even sure what it is yet, but I promise you the label will be awesome.
Jeremy, obviously living in San Antonio, Military City, USA, and my time in San Antonio, veteran causes, I became pretty close to a lot of them because there's a lot of veterans in San Antonio, and it's worth noting that 22 veterans commit suicide every single day, which is insane. So for people listening, please support veterans charities and support the troops. We say we support the troops, but let's actually do it, because there's a lot of them that are coming back and need help.
Specifically, the charity that we're doing a lot of work for, and actually I'm going to be attending a fundraiser for them on Saturday, is a charity called Special Ops Excursions. What they do is take special ops soldiers and veterans, and as they come off of active duty or come off of a particularly stressful situation, they'll take them on hunting trips or fishing trips, or usually some kind of outdoor something or other, to kind of help them sort of get their mind right and be ready to integrate back into society and keep kicking ass.
So the founder of Special Ops Excursions has it's not a farm, it's a ranch in Tennessee, where all these activities come.
Awesome.
When they do other things, actually,
do
yeah, like they do fishing trips. They do some golf fishing and some other stuff like that. I've actually sponsored some stuff. There's a fishing guide that Ari and I know who is potentially going to be able to help out there.
Oh no. He's going to be awfully mean to them or demanding.
No, Larry he'll be nice to the troops.
He will be. I already told you.
my favorite story about Larry is our fishing guide down at Port Aransas.
He's tough, but he gets results.
Tough but fair. My favorite story about Larry is, actually, it was the last time I was on a boat with him. I was there with my stepfather and some other folks, and of course, my stepfather has to ask everybody their whole life story and everything they've ever done and all that. So Larry's talking about his life story, and he used to work at a lumber yard. And then he said, and then just one day they hired a manager of human resources. And that was it for me. So I love Larry dearly. That's the kind of man we're talking about here.
He's a man that cannot be held back by HR.
That's right. And there will be no HR or politically correctness that will hold Larry back from saying exactly what's on his mind.
No time for resources for humans.
No. Larry is human resources. But that's the kind of thing that Special Ops does, is take them out on those sorts of excursions and kind of help people that have given our country a whole heck of a lot, a kind of smoother transition back into just normal life, because that's really difficult for a lot of these guys, and for good reason.
Well said. Okay, so anything else you want to say here on the eve of this barrel pick people should know?
Well, people should know that I'm going to continue honing my palate here this evening. I'm going to do my best to knock a dent in some of these 2-ounce TSA approved bottles.
That's right. You can't take them back. There's no taking them back.
That's right. Well, I can take them. I can take them back.
All the 2-ounce bottles
I hope not to. And my wife Lauren really hopes that I don't. whatever I bring back now has to be moved to our new house.
So can I ask you guys a question that's unrelated to bourbon?
Sure.
So how did you feel about the Cowboys almost win? Right? Was there deep conflict there? I mean,
so the Cowboys nearly knocked off an undefeated Steelers team. Dan, I'll tell you, it was a very unique experience for me because my first sports talk radio show was in Austin, Texas 10 years ago. And the quarterback of the Texas Longhorns at that point in time was Garrett Gilbert, who was the quarterback of the Cowboys. Now, Gilbert was the Gatorade National Player of the Year coming out of Lake Travis High School in Austin. He was the next great quarterback for the University of Texas. It was Vince Young, Colt McCoy, and then Garrett Gilbert. And he came into the national championship game to replace Colt McCoy after he went down. And he was just a significant disappointment. He threw twice as many interceptions in his career at Texas as he did touchdowns. It was the beginning of the end of the Mac Brown era. It was the beginning of the end of Texas football as we know it. So it was a crazy experience for me to be watching him play as the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. Because 10 years ago, I never thought in a million years that I would see that happen. And it was this crazy experience for me in particular because it took me back to sort of where I got the start of my career and like watching Texas games with him as this little wide-eyed kid squinting after a play. And even crazier, the running back on those teams is this guy named Fozzie Whitaker, who I now host with on Mondays on SiriusXM. So it was like I did that on a Sunday, and then the next day I was talking about that game with Fozzie. It was a crazy experience. But it would have been cool to see Garrett Gilbert get the win and the Cowboys get the win.
No, it wouldn't have.
It would have been cool.
No, it wouldn't have.
But yeah, it obviously it was a good moral victory, and Cowboys fans are all about moral victories right now.
Moral victories move up the draft board. Actual victories move down the draft board.
That's right.
And Ari promised me before the season started that that's not the sort of thing that I would be saying this season, but here I am. And I made this joke last week, but Garrett Gilbert was so bad that he got Mac Brown fired.
Yes.
It goes Vince Young, national championship, Colt McCoy, appearance in the national championship, Garrett Gilbert, you're fired. And, I know Mac Brown a little bit. I've got family members that know him a lot. He's a good guy, didn't deserve that. And it's Garrett Gilbert's fault.
Yes.
I am blown away that he draws a paycheck for playing professional quarterback.
Were you not blown away by how he played, though?
And that's what I was going to say. I'm even more blown away that he didn't embarrass himself.
Pretty cool story.
No, it's not.
Pretty cool story.
It's a terrible story. In answer to Dan's question, how did I feel as that was happening? At this point, I just want draft picks, but also the Cowboys hate the Steelers. So you're sitting there. So I was not sad to see Ben Roethlisberger get roughed up a little bit. In addition to being a Pittsburgh Steeler, he's also apparently not like the coolest guy in the world.
May have been implicated in a couple of
it's possible
extracurricular.
So the whole thing, Cowboys games are now this whole other experience for me where I don't really even know what I'm rooting for because I'm the fourth generation of my family that does this. I have to watch the damn thing. So I'm just, I'll tell you, here's what Cowboys games are for me now. I've taught my daughter to do the Zeke feed me thing whenever Zeke gets the ball. So that's what Cowboys games are for me now. It's how can I pass this curse on to the next generation? And this season,
it's going swimmingly.
We've made tremendous progress until the end of the game when my daughter looked at me and said, "Daddy, the Cowboys don't win very much, do they?"
Very astute observation.
Welcome, sweetie.
You didn't say next year.
Yeah. I told her Uncle Ari says they'll be good next year.
And with that, Jeremy, leave the people with something.
Wish us luck tomorrow. Next week we'll come with you, give you some updates. Check out Instagram Steak Bourbon Sports. Unless I forget, I'll be updating that for the first time in a while. Our barrel picking adventures at Four Roses. And until the next time we talk to you, fare thee well.
Awesome. Good stuff.
Fucking Cowboys.
Fucking Cowboys.